One of the things that's become increasingly obvious in my time as a film critic is that when it comes to mainstream movies, we're pretty much living in a post-creativity world now, a time when it's considered easier and safer to just rehash previously successful ideas and formulas rather than risk coming up with something new and original. I've talked before about the endless remakes and reboots that Hollywood's been churning out for the past 10 years, apparently oblivious to the fact that about 90% of them fail, but one of the more insidious concepts to creep into modern cinema is the idea of the soft reboots. Now don't get me wrong, I can totally understand why they're a thing. See, Hollywood isn't quite as dumb as you might think when it comes to finding new and inventive ways to squeeze money out of tired old franchises. They know that producing direct sequels becomes increasingly difficult over time because every sequel comes with the unspoken expectation that you'll move the story and characters forward somehow, building on what came before and breaking new ground in some way. And if you're a dumb as fuck screenwriter without an ounce of creativity or original ideas, then this is like garlic to a fucking vampire. A full-on remake, on the other hand, comes with its own set of problems, because not only does it invite unflattering comparisons to the original, but it also means launching your new movie without those all-important cameos from the original cast, which is one of the few things still guaranteed to get arses on seats. The solution? Combine the best elements of both ideas into one grift to rule them all: the soft reboots. So how exactly does it work? Well, after thinking it over while taking a shit earlier, I believe I've identified the 5 key elements of a soft reboot. 1. Find an old franchise. Ideally, a soft reboot should target a franchise that's at least a couple of decades old and hasn't seen any significant activity for quite some time. This increases the demand and excitement for new installments and allows our collective memory of past events to fade, which facilitates... Number 2. Loose continuity. It's going to be marketed as a conventional sequel, acknowledging the characters and events of previous movies, but leaving the continuity vague enough that the writers can safely ignore anything which contradicts their new film. Number 3. Nostalgia. It's likely to include lots of callbacks, in-jokes and references to past events, because nostalgia has become the new sex appeal. It sells tickets. Boobs are still better though. Number 4. Cameos. It'll include at least one appearance from a legacy character, again for nostalgia purposes, and to give the film a sense of legitimacy that it may or may not deserve. Number 5. Sequel bait. Ultimately, the point of a soft reboot is to pass the torch to a new generation of younger, cooler, and most importantly of all, cheaper actors who can carry the franchise for the next decade, so the ending is likely to be as open as possible, paving the way for possible sequels, spin-offs and TV shows. Basically, the goal here is to launch the next MCU. Now this all sounds fair enough, right? After all, it's what movies do these days. But peel back this innocuous veneer and you'll find the rotten core that lies beneath. Because the more you think about the actual plot, the more you'll probably realise that it's nothing but a tired rehash of the same fucking story that already got told decades earlier. A remake in sequels clothing, if you will. You want some examples? Well, how about Jurassic World, which takes place a couple of decades after the events of Jurassic Park, and even uses the original buildings, vehicles and equipment to milk those bloated nostalgia teats. But really, what does it do except tell the same fucking story all over again? Both movies focus on the theme of science going too far by resurrecting long dead and extremely dangerous animals, and humanity's flawed belief that they can control them. Both centre around a futuristic theme park that promises great things but ultimately turns into a nightmare when things get out of control. Both feature an idealistic park owner blinded by his own lofty dreams, a shady subordinate with his own agenda, a pair of young siblings thrust into a survival situation, a male and female lead with a romantic attraction who have to rescue them, raptors for some tight claustrophobic chase scenes, and a big scary monster dinosaur to act as the final boss. Jurassic World is, for all intents and purposes, a carbon copy of the original script, only with most of the intelligent themes and ideas chopped out to make way for goofy humour, character threads that go nowhere, and meta references to the declining quality of sequels.
Bigger. Scarier? Cooler, I believe is the word that you used in your memo.
It's a textbook example of a soft reboot that's inferior to the original in every way possible, but it doesn't end there, dear viewer. Oh no, there's much worse to come. Like Star Wars The Force Awakens, which is set about 30 years after the events of A New Hope, and again tries to walk that fine line between exploiting the original events and characters for nostalgia purposes, while simultaneously hoping you'll forget them just enough that they can get away with telling the same fucking story all over again. Both films feature a young orphan living a simple life on a remote desert planet, only to get swept up in a grand space adventure when they rescue a droid carrying important information that the antagonists are desperate to recover. Both feature a masked antagonist with a red lightsaber and formidable force abilities, and his sinister master pulling the strings behind the scenes. Both feature an evil empire bent on galactic domination with a planet-killing superweapon that has to be destroyed in the climactic space battle. And that's not even counting all the stuff that's just been blatantly copied over to cynically exploit fan nostalgia. Like X-Wings, because they're cool, right? Or the Millennium Falcon, or Chewbacca, or Star Destroyers, or Han Solo, or Princess Leia, or Anakin's lightsaber, which shows up here without any real explanation. The Force Awakens is perhaps the ultimate example of how easy it is to pull the wool over people's eyes, an utterly safe and predictable rehash of a previously successful story with flashy new special effects, and just enough characters, references and callbacks to the original to convince longtime fans that this movie is somehow on their side. It truly is a work of retarded genius from one of Hollywood's most successful con men, and the real problem is that it paved the way for even worse things to come. See, the thing that Jurassic World and Force Awakens have in common is that they were both massively successful. These two movies made obscene amounts of money, and this success at the box office sent shockwaves through the noble town of Hollywood, convincing executives everywhere that soft reboots of old franchises were a quick and easy way to make bank. Which is why we ended up with fucking garbage like Terminator Dark Fate, which accomplished in its first 5 minutes what no actual Terminator had managed to do in more than 30 years, killing off the character whose survival was central to the entire point of the series. It also retconned Terminator 3, Salvation and Genesis out of existence, and set up its own new continuity, which was basically the exact same story as before. Once again, an AI in the near future becomes self-aware and launches an apocalyptic war against humanity, killing billions and turning the world into an irradiated wasteland, until a lone warrior unites the scattered fragments of mankind to strike back at them. Once again, the machines on the verge of defeat are able to send a Terminator back in time to kill this future savior of humanity before they can become a threat. And once again, a lone soldier is sent back by the human resistance to act as a protector. But it's totally different this time, you see, because now they're both girls. And because nostalgia is basically the only asset we have to work with now, a couple of old characters show up in a totally unrelated subplot that fits into the main narrative about as comfortably as an intersectional feminist at a Dave Chappelle gig. If Force Awakens and Jurassic World showed how financially successful the concept of a soft reboot could be, then Dark Fate is a perfect example of how fucking badly it can go wrong. But the thing is, even spectacular failures like this weren't enough to derail the concept, which is why we ended up with Ghostbusters Afterlife. Now, don't get me wrong, it was definitely a big step up from the disaster of Ghostbusters 2016, and I think for the most part it was a well-intentioned film, but I was also probably more forgiving towards it in my review than it really deserved, because really it has all the hallmarks of a soft reboot, coupled with absolutely shameless nostalgia baiting. Remember Gozer? Remember the Hellhounds? Remember the Keymaster and the Gatekeeper? Remember the Proton Packs? Remember the Ecto-1? Remember the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man? Remember the PKE meter? Remember the traps? Damn man, they even have the original Ghostbusters show up in the finale with absolutely no explanation for how they got here, why they're wearing their original uniforms, or where they found spare proton packs from. It's difficult to sum up the thinking behind this kind of writing, but helpfully enough, Red Letter Media did it for me.
Don't ask questions. Just consume product and then get excited for next product.
And I think ultimately that mantra pretty much sums up the rationale behind soft reboots. It's the same kind of mentality that expects people to spend hundreds or even thousands of dollars to upgrade to the latest shiny glass rectangle, which is functionally and visually almost identical to the shiny glass rectangle they bought 12 months earlier. But hey, I guess there's a sucker born every minute. You're not really meant to question how the same exact events keep playing out in the same narrative universe universes without anyone noticing it. You're not meant to question why existing characters get turned into completely different people to service their roles in the rebooted narrative. You're not meant to question how wildly implausible and downright ridiculous it is for so many artifacts from previous adventures to conveniently show up again. And you're definitely not meant to question how cheap and hollow and manipulative it all is. It's the writing equivalent of wanting to have your cake and eat it, shamelessly milking and exploiting the very thing you're shitting all over by retelling the same stories again and again. And the result is a kind of depressing stagnation in pop culture, a loss of confidence in our own creativity, and an increasing tendency to look back instead of forwards. Be honest here, how many songs nowadays are just a remix of some dance track from 10 or 20 years ago? How many kids' TV shows are just repackaged versions of the same stuff that my generation were watching as kids? How many movies today are reboots, remakes, reimaginings, or soft reboots of stuff that's already been done before and done better? I guess what I'm saying here is that while it's good to honour the past, sometimes the best way to do that is just to leave it the fuck alone and move forward on your own merits. If you actually give a shit about storytelling, then you should be creative and talented enough to tell your own stories. Stop using the past as a crutch to support your own mediocre work today. Make new things, invent new worlds and characters, strike out in new directions, be willing to take risks and face criticism and failure. That's what makes great stories and great people. And well, I think we could do with both of those things more than ever now. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.